Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Let's Have Renaissance, a podcast about literature and the arts. I am Ito Otini.
And I'm Makaya Otini, and today we're speaking with Keith Crowley. Keith is a Tampa Bay-area painter with a burgeoning interest in sculpture. He holds an MFA from Savannah College of Art and Design and has shown paintings in Florida, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and elsewhere. We're excited to be with him today.
Thank you for tuning in. We're excited that you're here. Why don't you also subscribe, like, comment, and share this episode with your friends?
And if you know anyone who wants to come on the podcast, please do send them our way. Also, if you haven't yet, sign up for our free newsletter where we share updates, resources, and opportunities. To support the podcast, you can make a one-time donation through our website or purchase a subscription to our blog where you'll find more premium content and resources at thedatekeepers.com. Thank you for being a part of our community.
Keith, thank you so much for joining us. We're excited to have you. Can you tell us about yourself and what are you working on now?
Thank you. This is a great pleasure and honor. I really appreciate you all having me on. Most of my subject matter comes from these snapshots that I take almost accidentally, things I happen upon in my life. This has been developing over years, and through having a phone in my pocket at all times, that's kind of made the process even a little more serendipitous, which I tend to trust those things more. A lot of my subject matter is things in my surroundings that kind of show up and have an inevitable feeling about them. Over the last 10 to 12 years, residential structures like very ubiquitous homes and environments that I find myself in seem to show up in my imagery more than anything else. And so I'm presently actually getting ready to shift gears, and I'm making models for a large sculptural proposal installation, which is completely new territory for me in terms of my production. However, I've worked doing home renovations and that sort of thing. I love building materials, but I've never used them in a sculptural capacity before.
Can you tell us more about this sculpture project?
I can, and I'm kind of letting the cat out of the bag because it's so every 3 years where I live in the Tampa Bay region, there's this thing called the Skyway exhibition, and it plucks artists from all around this sort of 5-county area. And artists submit, a body of work that curators will then consider and then select and whittle down the artists they want to work with from that. I've been using this theme of these South Florida homes and environments, and I've been included in 3 of these exhibitions so far, but only paintings have been shown. So what I'm interested in is actually these residential structures that you see along Highway 75, these large HOA communities where colors only vary slightly between house to house. And I'm not interested in irony, actually. This isn't a critique on how people live or Americana or anything like that. I'm actually just fascinated by the sort of monolithic aspects of these things and how they almost feel like spaceships landing on a landscape. Since I moved here in 2015, I've just seen these pop up more and more. And my models have these shapes kind of partially submerged into the ground, almost as though they've sunk. But strangely, in my brain, I don't see them as sinking. I see them as kind of like emerging from the ground. Anyway, it's a lot to work out. I plan to have some sort of a sound element inside some of these structures, as well as lights where a window might be partially visible from looking in from the outside. I didn't grow up with art. I grew up with TV and MTV music videos, and that was kind of my hook into eventually wanting to become a painter.
Can you tell us more about that?
Oh, of course. Yeah. So I grew up in this kind of unremarkable suburb outside of Philadelphia. I grew up in a large family of 10 kids, and I was actually homeschooled, which was kind of in the 80s, that was like a guinea pig sort of generation of people who started homeschooling kids. And so it was either usually people who had very kind of conservative religious views that wanted to sort of keep their kids close, and then other people who tended to be more countercultural. And it was kind of those 2 groups that seemed to do this. Anyway, so I wasn't exposed to a whole lot. And eventually, my senior year of high school, I was absolutely tired of it. And I enrolled myself in public school. Like, I called up the guidance counselor, and she thought I was prank calling her, actually. And And so, yeah, and I met this great man who was the art teacher, and he actually happened to be the baseball coach as well. And I sort of glommed onto him. And like most homeschool kids, I had difficulty relating to my peers. And so I would spend all this time in Mr. Essery's classroom. So I ended up playing baseball. We had this like magical baseball season. And I've always seen creativity and sports as like symbiotic. And weirdly enough, in these social groups, I found it to be like the two groups seem to not overlap at all in the high school setting. And I thought that was really strange, having never been exposed to this before. So Mr. Essery was the one, he really encouraged me to go to college, and I wanted to go to college. And I wanted to be like him. I wanted to just be a high school art teacher and coach baseball. And after 2 years of that, I realized it was like, it just wasn't, the process of learning to be an educator wasn't as interesting as the actual making part. So on one of my breaks, I visited with him, and his son actually happened to be at Savannah College of Art and Design on a baseball scholarship. And so before I even opened my mouth, he said, "Hey, have you ever considered transferring?" And I was about to ask him. And so long story short, I ended up transferring, getting this great baseball scholarship, really getting introduced to painting while I was in Savannah. And painting just immediately felt right to me, and ended up finishing up there. And then I did graduate study there as well.
I am curious, when you were studying at home, like what was that like? And were you exposed to a lot of subjects, or did your parents choose what you were going to read? Was there a curriculum?
That's a good question. When I was coming up, so it was me and my two younger siblings. So we were at the tail end. We were like 8th, 9th, and 10th kids in our family. So there was like a local church school that my family was involved with. So we used the same curriculum as that. And they would send the stuff all the way from Texas. And my mom would create like an assignment from these workbooks, and you would kind of go through whatever she laid out for you for the day. And, you would work at your own pace. So if you got it done ahead of time, you had free time afterwards. So it kind of put some of the onus on you, but my mom still worked hard to try to create. I remember like on Sundays, she'd be up and making these lists of, complete this amount of pages in your math textbook, so on and so forth. But in terms of literature, it was very, very limited. Like most of the stuff that, like Catcher in the Rye and things like that people are reading in middle school, like I had to read it as an adult, which is kind of interesting now because I have this beginner's mind imposter syndrome combination where I'm like actually finding it a great discovery to read Catcher in the Rye as a 40-some-year-old person,
Okay, I'm curious too, because I was also homeschooled, and I'm wondering if your interest, your artistic preoccupation with mundane structures has anything to do with this. Because one of the vestigial qualities that I took out of homeschooling was a fascination with things that for most people who've been conditioned by the normal circumstances of growing up in mainstream society just don't register. They're too mundane, they're part of the background. But another thing that I've noticed about myself is that, especially as a younger person, I didn't really have a strong sense of what was normal and what was not. I might intellectually have a sense of like, oh, this is a more common experience than that. But for me, things that were mundane could be very intriguing, and things that were considered beyond the pale, like outside of the range of what is acceptable to talk about or think about socially, they were not qualitatively different for me. So I'm wondering, your work deals, as you said, with commonplace landscapes and urban settings and things that people walk by every day and may not even consciously pay attention to because they are part of the background and you're making them the foreground. Have you thought about that connection?
You're the first person who ever made that connection. I've thought about that. I don't think I've ever articulated it before. Where did you grow up, Micaiah?
North Carolina, Asheville.
Oh, okay. Which part?
West Asheville.
Cool. Yeah. So I've always, even when I'm watching a film, especially I would say when I'm watching a film, I tend to just really look at pictures. And sometimes I'll be spending so much time looking at the picture of how somebody composed a space and its relatability in that sense and its simplicity, that I do remember moments just sitting at the kitchen table while I'm trying to focus on this difficult math. Didn't come easily to me, so I would really struggle. And then my mind would wander, and I would just sit and watch my mom washing dishes and watch the light pass over her shoulder. And then, like those kinds of things. I didn't know what to do with that when I was at that age, but I think it's like a time release capsule that probably manifests later on. But I do remember I had this art ed professor. He was almost at retirement, and he kind of was like a curmudgeonly type of guy. His mantra when he was teaching us how to paint, and this was when I was just studying to be a teacher, is he would say, paint what you know. I don't want to see dragons and, all these spectacular things that you don't really understand. You're just learning how to use this language of paint. Start with your doorknob. Like, your doorknob is really interesting. You use it every single day, and it has peculiar things from you manipulating it and your grease rubbing off on it. It's like, that is way more compelling than something that you can try to channel up. And that thought really resonated with me. But I also remembered, like, even in like scary things that I'd watched, like, Twilight Zone was scary to me when I was a kid. Me and my brother would sneak off instead of doing our homework. We watched these old episodes of stuff. And I remember this one Twilight Zone is this guy just shows up at this diner and everybody is gone, but there'd be evidence of somebody just being there. Like the jukebox would just be finishing a song, or there'd be the tea kettle is going. And it was all these very mundane environments that would be otherwise peaceful, but it was like the absence of something made them kind of unsettling, and it created tension that made me excited and scared. And I still remember all that stuff. And I sort of like when an image has this kind of tension where you're not really sure where that tension is coming from. But I think that tension's pretty exciting. And I think you're right. I think most of our stuff that we create from has these deep archives in our personal experiences from the formative years,
And there's not a lot of people in your paintings, right? Like, some of them have traffic, and you can presume that there are people driving those cars, but there's not a lot of actual human figures in your painting. Why do you think that is?
I think the absence, like I said, of the figure causes us to feel a bit of tension because, our world is pretty full at this point. But I do like to throw a figure in there every once in a while, almost on impulse, just to contradict myself. They're usually very anonymous in their feeling. I tend to like to create a sort of a set or a space that the viewer, and I consider myself the first viewer. Like, when I'm making a painting, being a viewer is as big a part of making a painting as actually doing the physical decision making on the surface or the planning and all that stuff. Like, being the viewer is actually the first reward of being an artist, I think, because you have all this time to spend looking at what you hope to see. That's a great moment for me, is to like sit and spend time and be the viewer and feel those kinds of things.
I am curious, how do you react to feedback? Because
I tend to limit the voices, but I do like to know like what an image makes them feel. Like, to get my son to talk about a painting, for example, I usually have to ask him like, okay, what does this one make you feel? And I think he feels like he has an empowered opportunity to say something that's not right, wrong, or whatever. He just will be able to start talking about that.
Can you give an example? Like, what are some responses you've gotten from your son to your paintings? And did those ever change your approach to that painting or to a subsequent painting?
Well, I just recently did this pretty large painting of a home that was just obliterated from a hurricane, and it's near the house. And it was at this really saccharine sunset. And it was the only way that I felt in my whole life I could allow myself to paint such a beautiful sunset, was if there was this ruin in front of it that you're looking out from. And I remembered him talking to me about what it reminded him of. We watched like films together. That's our form of connection. And like Blade Runner 2049 comes to mind. He knows this landscape really well. So I think he just found it fairly unsettling, but exciting at the same time, because it has this combination of beauty in terms of the craftsmanship of the painting, but also, it's ruinous, and it's got this large curved pool that's empty, and there's glass on the ground. And I think it reminded him of like a diorama at a natural history museum or something like that.
And can you talk about the role of blur in your paintings? Not all of your compositions are equally blurry. Some are just a little bit fuzzy, and some it's like you're looking through a rain-streaked windshield. And I'm curious how you choose how blurred an image is going to be, and at what point in the process do you arrive at that decision, and what are the factors that influence it?
I would say it's often not cognitive. It's usually a feeling that an image gives me, because I take so many photographs. The blur is usually when the camera's trying to figure out what it wants to focus on. And so if that accident can happen, it obscures the image to some degree. This is a technique that goes back to the Italian masters as far back as like Raphael. And they referred to this as sfumato, which translates literally as smoke. When the paint is wet, you sort of continue brushing it with a very soft sable brush that allows this kind of feeling of the edges to merge from one shape to another. And they would use it to give the illusion of something rounding a corner. You'd have hard contrast up in the foreground, and then as somebody's, say, their thigh, where it rounds, they would use sfumato on that edge to give it that feeling of disappearing. They were trying to create an optical illusion, but I think it even goes further than that. I think that sense of that softness, to me, is an allusion, not an illusion, but an allusion to things we can't completely comprehend.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with us before we sign off?
Shoot, you've given me a lot to think about. I mean, I'm so impressed at how you two create this environment, this kind of like living room atmosphere, and I'm staring at a screen. I just really appreciate that. I appreciate the warmth that you're bringing to this conversation.
Hey, thanks for being part of it.
Thank you for being part of it. We love it. We enjoy it. And we look forward to more conversations like these.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I think it's just really great what y'all are doing.
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for coming on. And
good luck with the sculpture project.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.